delegates, and Dr. Salim Thum and Dr. Balsamo, Donato Balsamo, were both unanimously approved. Dr. Balsamo is approved on the condition that he will provide his New York State license. The next order of business is discussion of the policy regarding our coagulant testing. As you recall, we recently implemented checking PT, INR, and PTT and platelet count in our boxers on a one-time condition before they enter the ring. This is once in their whole career they have to do it. They have to do it before each fight. And when we initially started doing the PT-INRs, the PTs were coming back mildly elevated, sometimes with a normal INR, sometimes with an elevated INR. We ended up sending all of these boxers to a hematologist for clearance. All of them were cleared. So we subsequently wanted to come up with a better method to assess the PT-INR, and it was determined that it might be best to look at the INR. We'll look at both together, PT and INR together. But if the PT was elevated and the INR was normal, we were going to let the boxer compete. And we had circulated this by email, and the majority of the board had approved this. So I guess we need to get a formal approval here in the meeting today that when we're looking at the PT-INR, if the PT is slightly elevated and the INR is normal, we will let the boxer compete. And if the PT and if the INR is abnormal, elevated, then we'll have them seen by a hematologist.
Are we open for discussion?
Yeah.
So, what about just repeating it?
Yeah, we've done that too.
Because it just seems like it's not going to be, it's going to be lab error well over half of the time. So I would say, at first pass, if it doesn't, rather than send to hematologist, the expense of that is
right.
Just repeat it.
Repeat it.
And then if they have two abnormals, then refer them. But I think a prudent policy would be just to repeat every one that's abnormal as the next step.
So you say repeat it if the PT and INR are both abnormal?
Correct.
But if the PT is abnormal and INR is normal, then let
I
it
would
go.
go for a pass,
Okay.
yeah.
That makes sense. And be quite frank, quite honest, we haven't had that many since we had this new approach. We haven't had that many that we've had to refer to the hematologist. For a while there, we were sending 5 boxes a week or
about a third of the boxers for a while.
Yeah.
And actually, what you're suggesting, that the most recent situation where we thought about sending someone to a hematologist, one wasn't available, it was upstate, and he did go for a repeat test, and in fact was fine.
Yeah, that was an elevated PTT, but still the same.
Okay.
Thing. So you want to put that into a formal motion, and then?
Yeah, so I'd move that basically go off the INR. And if the INR is normal, they're fine. If the INR is abnormal, I propose that we repeat the INR. If it's still abnormal, they need to see a hematologist before clearing.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Second.
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. So let it be noted that was unanimously approved. The next order of business is just a discussion, really, of how we complete our injury report forms, accident report forms. Typically, at ringside, we have one doctor in each corner, and we also have one or more physicians that cover the locker room. And there are times when we end up getting multiple injury reports, and I just had to clarify that with our ringside physicians that at minimum we need at least one injury report a boxer is injured. And if multiple doctors examine the boxer, then I'm requiring that each of them complete an injury report form. So, for example, if someone has a really significant injury where they get hurt in the ring, say if they get knocked out, the ringside doctor that evaluates them in the ring should complete a injury report form as well as the one in the back. But the physician that's in the locker room should always complete an injury report form on an injured boxer. And the question is whether the ringside doctor should complete a form. And we're having those individuals complete a form if they examine that boxer at ringside.
We always been doing that.
I know, but for some reason, I think some of the physicians, that wasn't clear. So this is just basically a matter of clarification. We don't need a formal.
No.
Okay. All right. The next order of business is talking about non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which is extremely important. But I think it's necessary for us to determine what's the best approach to discouraging and preventing the use of non-steroidals during a boxing match, prior to a boxing match. As it stands now, we don't allow boxers to compete if they are non-steroidals. But I think we need to make the boxers more aware of the potential harm of using non-steroidals. As it stands now, if a boxer comes to the weigh-in and they complete the weigh-in form, they have to document any medications they're on. So obviously, if a non-steroidal comes up, then that physician makes a determination that whether they could box or not. I have to admit, it hasn't really come up that often where someone has said they've been on non-steroidals, but I think it's important that we inform the boxers of this. And the question comes up, what is the best way to approach this? Whether we should list it as a banned substance, just send a bulletin out to the boxers saying you should avoid these medications 7 to 10 days prior to a bout. And also, maybe what's worth discussing is what is the real risk of bleeding while you take a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and you're exposed to head trauma. But I know, for example, in NFL, Toradol was not associated with any increased risk of hemorrhage. And there were periods there was Toradol was used quite a bit. So
yeah, now they've really scaled that back.
Scaled it back, yeah.
You know, I mean, part of that we just became a runaway train, but yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of questions. So to ban it, to me, we can't ban it if we're not testing for it.
Right.
And I'm not sure does our test pick up non-steroidals?
You can. It's expensive. But the other important thing is that if we test for it, it's too late anyway. Meaning that if we check their urine when they come to the boxing match, they're going to be boxing with the non-steroidal on board anyway. So testing is not really, I don't think it's going to
That's why
make any sense.
I think, you know, I think if you're going to ban it, that means you're going to test it, and then you're going to use that test. So I don't know how you can. So the language of banning.
Right.
So I think it would be difficult because it's really, in banning means you're really going to enforce that.
Yeah, I think banning would be banning something that would be like more performance enhancing. Because I mean, if you find out after, you want to do something with that information.
Right.
But I think you need to write something down, not just what medications you're on, but because so they understand you're taking any pain medicines, like, and maybe set some examples.
Yeah, and have a list.
Even over the counter.
My thought was to have a bulletin that we would give to the boxers and send it out saying avoid these medications prior to competing.
Yeah, or I think you could say just list any medications or supplements you're taking also.
Mhm.
In
Well, they already know, they already have to list the medications and supplements that they take. They do that.
but I don't know how much coaching them we're at that point. It seems like how much are we supposed to coach them into telling us the truth?
I was, that's a point, I did the World Police and Fire Games, and it's still, I can't stop their bleeding, lacerations. We had a lot of individuals, and particularly a fireman from Kansas City who competed in both boxing and in wrestling, and pulls down his singlet, black and blue all up and down his side. What did you take? I said, didn't they ask you? I didn't know they meant that.
Well, that's what I mean. So it's a good example. A lot of these guys don't really understand. To be perfectly honest, they don't really understand it. So you have to kind of spell it out a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's
And most of them will be honest and tell you if they're taking something like that.
Yeah.
You know? And if they're not, well, there's nothing we can do about it.
So what's the rule in terms of being off of it?
That's one of the things I wanted to discuss. I was thinking 7 to 10 days off of it, but 10 days too many. 7 is probably enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for surgeries, how long?
It's 5.
It's like, right, 5 to 7,
Yeah,
if you
I
operate
usually,
on them?
It's 7.
Right.
7
Yeah.
before an operation.
Yeah.
So
We could recommend that you not take these medications 7 days, 1 week prior to your competition.
Yeah, we bear.
And also probably put in the notice that sparring on these medications also is not safe.
And you probably do want to specify over the counter versus.
Yeah, no, I think we have to come up with a list of
Yeah, of anything.
all the different types of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories.
So you're speaking about
brand name.
preparing a bulletin that lays this out for the fighters that
Yeah.
we could distribute at weigh-ins, I assume.
Weigh-ins, but also I think we need a way to distribute it to the boxers before the weigh-in, because if you give it to them at the weigh-in and they've been taking it 3 days prior, then
Sure. I mean, our only real method of doing that is by letting the promoters know.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
all of their contact information.
yeah, they're putting it on the website.
Sure.
They've had a bunch of studies, but none of them obviously in the direction of boxing or wrestling for that matter, but in football about the use and abuse and the likelihood, and it was you had an enormous amount of daily users and abusers, and a lot of these guys are, I mean, for naproxen sodium, they're within prescription ranges and greater. 1,500, 2,000 on a daily basis. I mean, they start taking it, and it's like candy, and who knows, I mean, there are also studies with regards to swelling from the medication and the greater likelihood of trauma from that. So, I really think that, in particularly, if you approach it not so much from a brain trauma, but additionally just from a laceration that will call your fight rapidly if we can't control the bleeding, they would be more inclined to cooperate because they wouldn't want to have that happen. Because I tell you, I had a guy, the state trooper, Orangeburg, barely a half an inch. It ended up being 1.5 inches by the time we stitched it up. It kept popping open, kept popping open, kept popping open, kept popping open. So that alone should, I mean, I think if you approach it that way, they would be fearful for that. I mean, because it's not so much a banned substance that we're trying to keep you in the fight.
Obviously, including aspirin as well.
Yeah,
Of course.
absolutely. So when I was thinking about this, then obviously other medications that will affect your bleeding came to mind, and I mean, the likelihood of a boxer being on an anticoagulant for a medical condition is extremely unlikely, just because of the severity of that medical condition that will require that. But I'm just wondering, do we need to just at least mention it so they know that these certain medications, some of these oral anticoagulants, that they should avoid? But I mean, but obviously they're going to put this medications they're taking. But I've never, 30 years, seen somebody come in and say, "Oh, I'm taking Coumadin." And these new oral Xarelto and new oral medications.
I think you already say, do you take any prescription medicines? That should be, I think we're more worried about things that aren't prescription.
Yeah. So do you think is any need to say anything about it, or just go by what we normally do when the physician examines the boxer, questions him on medication? Obviously, I mean, the likelihood of somebody coming in on an anticoagulant is low. I mean, what would be the indications of DVT or PE? They're not going to be boxing. So,
In the pre-fight examinations, do the doctors specifically ask about aspirin and these other medications?
they usually, I can't tell you what each physician does, but they look at what medications they list that they're taking. And they go over it and say, "Are you taking any medications?" Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering, in addition to preparing this bulletin, if it's worth giving some kind of direction to the ringside physicians who do these pre-fight physicals as to what they should ask.
I think it definitely is, because like I said, if you can get it out of the boxer, what have you been taking? Anything over the counter, anything for pain? If you had, your hand hurting, what do you take for that? Even some people taking some high dose supplements like flaxseed oil and stuff that cause increased bleeding time. Stuff like that, and that the doc can do that. But the only problem is by the time he does that, it's a little bit too late for that fight. So that's why it's really good to get some bulletin out to the promoters so they know.
No, I think that makes sense. I just wonder whether both
definitely.
things make sense.
I think it should definitely be my opinion.
Yeah, just as you remind, I'm almost 100% certain most of the docs go over the meds.
I think we all do.
Sure.
It's not a bad idea to reinforce.
No, I think that's right, but it's worth having a consistent policy so that they know they should be delving into those areas.
Right.
And in addition to that, if they hear it repeatedly over fight after fight, they're going to say, why does he ask me that all the time?
How long before the fight is the examination?
Usually the day before, 24 hours.
1 or 2 days before.
So I guess we'll do the bulletin, try and get it out to the boxers, and also reinforce to the ringside physicians the importance of going through the medications and making sure they're not on any medications that may increase their risk of injury prior to the bout. And so I don't think it's necessary to mention the other anticoagulants, right?
I know, because then you gotta go on and on.
Yeah. That just goes under best practice.
But some of those herbal things, right? I think St. John's wort is it, I think, or one of those, and fish oil, I think.
Fish oil does,
I know high doses of vitamin E.
Yeah.
Vitamin E.
Right.
Yes.
Super high doses,
Right.
though.
So those should be
Yeah,
included.
so you
I think.
include those.
Right, because people think they're being healthy, and then.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful because they just recently had a recall because the dosages are not even remotely close. Some have nothing. Some, I mean, you can't trust. And these guys think they're taking this, and they might not
But I'll
even.
tell you, credit to the good trainers. Like, not maybe a lot of them don't have them, but they do tell them to stop all their supplements a couple of weeks before the fights. I noticed that, but not all of them are having, real trainers. You know what I mean?
Okay, so moving on. Now it's time for new business, open discussion. There is one thing I wanted to discuss, and I wanted to get the feedback from the MAB. If you look at your package, you have a form there. It says boxer medical suspension notice. And what this form is, this is a form that the ringside physician gives to the boxer on the night of the fight if they're suspended. This is just a way for us to inform the boxer that they've been suspended. In the past, we would just complete the injury report form, and then majority of the boxers would know they were suspended, but it wasn't formalized. And so this was to formalize that suspension so they know how long they're going to be suspended. Now, one of the questions that came up, and there's a couple of commissions that do this. If you look on the form,
There are two forms in the packet. One is
there's
the
a-
form
okay,
that we
you put
currently
both in
use,
there? Okay, yeah.
and one is perhaps a new version, but one that may need some more work before it's really becomes a new version.
So the old form is the one that says suspension is effective for 30 days, 45 days, 90 days, other, indefinite. What some commissions have done, say for example, if someone has a TKO, KO from a knockout, some commissions will say you're suspended for X amount of days, no sparring for X minus 10 days, or something like that. So I was just wanted to put that out to the board to get your thoughts on it. One of the issues that came up when I was looking at this and trying to figure out, I mean, if you look at it, you think about all the different types of injuries. Sometimes it may be difficult to say how long they shouldn't spar for. So I think it may potentially could be difficult unless you're going to limit it just to the head injuries. So I don't know.
I mean, I think there are two issues that you and I talked about. I mean, one issue is creating some kind of clarity for the fighters. Some of them don't know what a suspension really means. Some think it means I can't train at all. Some think that it means I can't spar. Some think that it only means I can't have a professional bout, but I can train and I can spar. So part of the purpose in thinking about ways to change this form is that they can look at this form and in a crystal clear way understand, okay, I'm not allowed to box, I'm not allowed to spar for X number of days. And the second part of it was what Barry mentioned and what some other states do, where they will say boxer is suspended for 60 days, no training for 30 days. In other words, no training at all for 30 days, which may be appropriate in certain cases where there are neurological injuries.
So, if somebody's prohibited from participating, do they have to get clearance before they can then participate?
In a competition or in sparring?
I would say for sparring, for anything.
It depends on the way that this suspension is issued. Very often the ringside physicians will issue an indefinite suspension requiring clearance before they're allowed to box again. In other cases, the suspension is only for a specified number of days without requiring clearance.
See, one of the disadvantages in boxing is that since it's not a team sport, you don't have access to the boxers all the time. So you may have a boxer that may compete tonight and they go to California the next morning. So obviously that type of follow-up is difficult unless you obviously get clearance on everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that so you're trying to determine return to play at the time of the event.
That's difficult. That's the point I was trying. I know.
Which is like impossible. So, and it's in every way, shape, or form, whether it's an ankle sprain or a concussion. So, it seems to me that is at the time of the event, it's really they're suspended, they're on notice as being suspended, and then it's their need, the boxer's need, to then get clearance from a physician, whether they're in Timbuktu or somewhere in between. So I don't really see how. I mean, this would be amazingly difficult for the ringside physicians because it's in the responsibility of the ringside. To me, is you're on notice as being suspended. Now you've got to now get somebody to clear you, and it just seems like this is
right.
harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, that was my concern. That it
and-
be difficult.
And to me, it doesn't matter if I think TKO 45 days. If they're still having headaches, they're not cleared in 45 days. So it's I still think that the next step is, I think it's a two-step process. It's you're suspended, and you got to get clearance from a medical physician to submit to the board. And anywhere in between is then up to the physician that's managing the case.
That would probably be the best practice in reality. You're probably right about that.
A lot of times when we do this indefinite suspension, we use that a lot, and then they usually can't even box in another state. They have to go somewhere else because they find out they're on suspension in New York, and then they call us up, and then we tell them, and then they get an evaluation wherever they live. But one thing I do agree is that a lot of times we put how many days for lacerations, and that's very easy to do. But for TKOs, and it says with head trauma, and
As opposed to a body blow.
yeah,
Well,
as opposed to a body.
I mean, the issue there is that, this comes not from anything in medicine, but from the law.
From the Bible,
Basically, our
yeah.
statute says if there's a KO, then there's an automatic 90-day suspension. And if there's a TKO with head trauma, there's an automatic 45-day suspension. So that's why those numbers are in the form, because it's required by law. And that's something separate, obviously, than the medical judgment.
Minimum of 45 days.
Yeah, you
That's
could
what we
put-
do.
you could put-
That's what
Right.
when I usually, let's say if someone has a TKO or a KO, and we have to legally have to suspend them 45 days, but I may want to suspend them indefinitely. I'll put indefinite suspension, minimum 45 days.
So that happens often.
Yeah.
Many of our doctors will.
I think
Suspend
the
someone in
reason
that
why
way.
this evolved is because the boxing community, the boxers are so mobile, it's so difficult to keep track of them. I think that this was originally devised that they're assuming that after 45 days, if someone did sustain a concussion, they should have recovered, which is only going to be 90% of them. But if you look at other sports, there's going to be 10% that still haven't gotten better about 45 days.
There's good communication between the states on these.
Nowadays it is, because they go to fight facts, the suspensions go to fight facts. But I like the point that James just brought up, that on certain injuries, at least the neurological ones, maybe we should get clearance on all of them. I don't know. If we think if we put it this way, if we think the boxer has sustained a concussion, then maybe we should get medical clearance. Not all TKOs are concussions. That's one important point to make. Sometimes the referee may stop the fight because the boxer's taking too many blows, but he has not sustained a concussion. So in that case, I don't think they probably need medical clearance. But if we think someone really has sustained a concussion, then maybe we should have medical clearance. That would be the
I
best
think
practice.
liability-wise, I think if somebody's taken enough body blows that the referee stops a fight,
Yeah.
I think that person needs to probably see a physician before they get cleared again. And to the point of hand lack, okay, so it pusses out in 5 days, and so, I mean, I think anything that would encourage the boxers to seek medical attention for any medical care rendered,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're basically, we would be forcing them to see somebody and follow up. And I can't see any injury that would be sustained at the event that really liability-wise would not benefit from seeing a physician afterwards. And even to the fact of, the cases of work comp and stuff where I was never better, and then I sustained this, and then they come back to this injury that got evaluated by the ringside, and now they're coming on the ringside that it was mishandled.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're avoiding that, because if you make them see a physician and say the physician says you're fine and you're cleared, now they can't go to a fight, get hurt again, and implicate the other fight.
That's a very good point.
So I mean, I just don't see anything that you would treat that wouldn't require
Or
some sort of
medical
follow-up.
follow-up, or benefit from a medical follow-up, yeah. You know, eye injuries, ortho injuries, we always pretty much get medical clearance. Laceration, we just use the time. But I guess, I mean, technically you could have raw,
I mean, a corneal abrasion would be a good example. That
yeah.
most of them are going to do fine.
Yeah.
But you sure wouldn't mind them seeing somebody in a few days to see how they're
That's
doing.
true. I mean, you'd be surprised how few you really see of that. But yeah, that's a good
I
example.
mean, I'm just. I mean, it's kind of a follow care. I think.
No, I agree. That but the problem. What's the story with this law though? Thing? It's kind of like that gets it confusing to me.
Yeah,
I got to tell you, a lot of
it's
times
been
we
there
just
for a
go
long time.
indefinite. He knows that we do a lot of indefinite. We just don't go by this.
I think if I was, it's the only box I would check because then I know they have to follow up with somebody to get cleared.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I think we use days just lacerations, more or less. So
Yeah.
maybe we need to redo this and
Yeah.
make it the way we normally.
So what's the thoughts about lacerations? A long time ago, when I first started, we would just put, I know Dr. Campbell, who was the medical director before I was a medical director, he would just put for laceration, suspended until healed. But then again, that's not really saying much either. And then more recently, we started putting time periods on it, depending upon the severity of the laceration. It was really superficial, maybe 30 days. Really bad ones, we could do 60 days.
I think a laceration, at least you could see, right? So at the physical before, it's easy enough to figure out if that's healed or not, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
whereas other things are more
Yeah.
complicated.
I like that we always do days, 30, 45, 90 days.
For
Sometimes we
lacerations.
do 90 days.
For lacerations. Okay.
If you have a vermilion, laceration is something really big, 90 days. But the docs are usually really good at
Yeah. So
is this form more for returning to training or more for returning to competition?
it's really more for letting them know they're suspended.
From competition.
Yeah, for competition. And
But
I
the
guess
reality is
it should be sparring too. It should be sparring. It's sparring and competition.
in any kind of trauma.
Yeah.
Right, a suspension means that you're not allowed to box in competition and you're not allowed to spar. I don't know that all boxers understand that. And that was one thought in terms of what this form could accomplish, let them know very clearly this is what you're not allowed to do.
Well, let's approach it from this way first. Let's just talk about lacerations. What does the board think is the best approach for lacerations in terms of suspension and follow up and what we tell the boxer? It's just the laceration part. Any thoughts?
My bent is all lacerations need follow-up care, and that really the clearance is provided by the follow-up physician.
Yeah.
Not the ringside. Then when you're trying to define laceration, there's just so many nuances.
Yeah.
The location, the depth, and what have you. It would be hard to come up with a blanket policy for lacerations. And I think the ringside would have the ability to say indefinite suspension, recommend at least 90 days. But the bottom line is somebody else should be taking care of it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Which brings up a good point that these boxers should be afforded better medical care. I think for the most part over the years, their medical care has been somewhat neglected.
Well, I think the majority of them don't have insurance.
Right.
So if somebody's injured in a fight, does that, in terms of the promoter or what have you, does the promoter have any responsibility to provide?
Promoters are required to purchase medical insurance that covers each of the fighters on the card. Right now, New York's requirements are $10,000 in medical coverage. Different states have different requirements.
So really, this would fall under quote-unquote work comp as it relates to the fight.
Yeah.
Or
Except
event comp.
it's not, yeah. I mean, it's not workers' comp simply because they're not employees, but they are covered by, for any injuries they sustain in the fight, they're covered up to $10,000 by the promoter's insurance.
Even if it's a visit 5 weeks later?
As long as it's related to the fight, they'll have the accident report. They'll have a claims form that we'll give to them that night, or we'll get to them afterwards if necessary.
That should be fine.
It's like these school injury insurances. So the coach documents the injury, and that form is basically their insurance card for that injury. And then they take that to the appointment, and that's where all the billing is. So you just tell them, hey, this is your insurance card. This is your Blue Cross Blue Shield card, and treat it accordingly. And so.
Right, and there's a deductible, but the promoters are required to pay that deductible.
Well, that's easy.
Okay, so I'm gathering what you're saying is that for all medical suspensions, we should be recommending medical clearance
To return.
before they return. Any other thoughts about that? It's probably, I have to be honest, probably the best practice.
Just days reeval.
I mean, the only question is the
Lacerations,
practicality of
30
it for
days,
certain fighters.
reeval, and and then let the last guy take the clearance.
But I know you said the practicality regarding the boxers, but it is their health, though. And it's
No,
their livelihood.
absolutely.
Well, you remove one barrier, so there shouldn't be cost.
Right.
So the second barrier is access, and I don't know how you. I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, they have enough resources that they have access, and I get it. They may not, but those are the type of people that if they haven't been evaluated and looked at, then I don't really feel comfortable with them coming back.
Yeah.
And it's really not fair, I don't think, for that to fall into the responsibility of the physician at weigh-in, because that's the worst time to try to really take a medical history and do an adequate exam, and then you've got the pressure that they're already in the card the next day.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't think that's fair to the weigh-in physician that all of a sudden this guy dropped off the map for the last 4 months. Nobody knows what happened to this injury, fractured hand, what have you. You have no documentation, and now he shows up at weigh-in, and you're going, so you broke your hand your last fight. Have you had an x-ray? No. Have you, I just think that's, I mean, I don't know, you guys do, that would be an uncomfortable position to be in, it seems
tough.
like.
It's hard to do all that the day before.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically, you're there crossing
The only thing I would
T's
say is
and
about getting back to laceration for a second is that there's a lot of lacerations, and there's a lot of them that are very superficial that will be nothing, like closed with glue,
What can,
or
I mean,
if somebody just swiped it, just you could tell when it happened,
Was there a box you could put laceration not needing follow, not required, follow-up not required, or something of that nature? Or
I mean, I get the point, anytime you get, but then it's like, if you have a laceration, I don't know. But
I mean,
it
and
will
that's
slow the whole process down.
I mean,
So if you
but
go
that's
to-
a question. Is there a need in every case? For example, somebody's dropped by a body shot and winded and can't get up by the count to 10, and 2 minutes later he's fine. But because the referee counted to 10, he's knocked out. He has a 90-day suspension. Does this person really need follow-up, or is he okay?
so if that happened in a football game, we'd follow them up the next day, because if they have blunt trauma to that magnitude, that we would never not see that person the next day.
Okay.
Because I mean, a lot of these splenic lacerations don't present right away. There's several case reports of presenting 24 hours later and the like. Kid for the Chiefs, quarterback for the Chiefs, had a splenic laceration splenic contusion on a Sunday, practice on Monday and Tuesday, and they kind of said, this doesn't look like it right on Wednesday. You got a CT scan. So I would also say that I get it. It's going to be an inconvenience, but there's also the liability factor that if one of these pusses out or what have you, and you haven't set up in mandated follow-up, then who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the poor guy that just tried to take care of him at ringside. And nobody's going to say, you could be criticized if you don't create follow-up, but you'll never be criticized if you do. I mean, I guess the best answer is don't get hurt. But and I get it.
This is the hurt game.
I know. I that's why I said
Everybody
I
gets
get
hurt.
it. But
Yeah.
but I don't think that just because it's common doesn't mean it shouldn't be followed.
Right.
Not
No,
my thoughts.
I have no argument against that.
I mean, in regards to
argue against that.
just the lacerations, the superficial ones, any laceration on a box where you guys are documenting it on this form? Any type of laceration?
The real superficial one that doesn't require any treatment.
If you don't have to close it, no.
We don't document those. And, sometimes the ones that require just a stereo strip,
Yeah, that's
sometimes it may be documented, sometimes it's not. If it's really superficial.
Well, no, I could
The
see
other
if
thing-
I could see if it's not documented and it's superficial, then
No, that
no
makes
damage
sense.
done. But if you document something on here, like
Yeah.
this guy has a laceration,
Right.
or whatever, how big, small it is, then
Yeah.
follow-up should be quality.
Yeah, and the thing, I'm just thinking a little bit further about what James was talking about. From the liability standpoint, you have to realize, I don't know if you all realize that a lot of times, the majority of the lacerations are sutured at ringside or in a locker room by the ringside docs. So I think if someone's going to suture a laceration and don't request follow-up, that increases their liability, I think.
I think it does.
Yeah.
That's something I always used to worry about when I used to suture at ringside is this thing going to get infected. That's one because it's not the best environment to suture.
Yeah.
And fortunately, no one did, but that's right because the vascular supply is so rich. But
I'm just worried about that whole period of time goes by, and then something happens 3 months later, and they're relating it back to the event.
yeah,
So I would really tell. I mean, it's kind of work comp world. The employer wants these people evaluated because then they get cleared. In a promoter sort of way, I would want them evaluated if they got hurt, so that somebody could say, "Hey, you're good," and so they've got that on their records. Yeah, as opposed to them saying, "Yeah, I broke my hand." Now they're saying 9 months or 6 months later, I broke my hand, but it really happened in this fight, and I was never, never healed or that type of thing.
okay. Does anybody want to make a motion or anything on how we should approach this?
I mean, listen, Dr. Kinderneck, I think these are excellent points you make, and a decision doesn't necessarily have to be made today. I mean, we can give thought to it. We can come back to it at the next meeting. I mean, whatever you feel makes sense, obviously.
I would, if there's a mechanism in place that we could kind of float some options by the ringside, the guys that have a lot of experience. I just think I would like their input into this and see if anybody has any pushback about requiring medical clearance. So it'd be really easy.
I don't think anybody's going to say, look, I've done a lot of fights. I don't think anyone's going to say no.
Well, it seems like more people would feel comfortable with it. That if we just require pretty simple.
I mean, the other option would be too, I was just thinking in my head about some of these injuries would be, what if we stopped fixing, let's say, lacerations ringside and requiring everybody to have them done, which some people do in an emergency room. How would that affect this whole situation?
Well, the ER will make them follow.
You know what I'm saying? But then that becomes. You can't go.
Well, but I don't. I mean, I don't know. I think we'd be getting in the way of sports medicine, really, because I think.
Because then you come into the question you just mentioned, like, is it, somebody, I don't know who said it, but it maybe, is this the proper environment to be fixing them in? I mean, we've always done it that way. But and I've never personally had any lacerations that have, something happened, they became infected or anything like that. But on the other hand, once in a blue, I have taken him to the emergency room, and it's a completely different environment, obviously.
But I think that's at the discretion of the ringside.
Yeah.
I think in terms of this, I think it's really how do we mandate suspensions? And I think the point I want to make is I think it's the worst time possible to try to mandate return to play on the day of injury.
Yeah, I agree. That's well established. That's why they don't use the rating scales anymore with the concussion.
I mean, it's like somebody sprained their MCL, so you kind of go, well, I don't know what this is going to look like. Let me see it in 2 or 3 days, and I'll be a lot better than today. I mean, I just think, and I think liability-wise, as far as the board goes, but I think liability-wise, as far as the event promoter goes, I mean, I just think, and the hassle factor is they're going to have to find a physician. But again, it sounds like the barrier of cost is covered. So it's really access.
No, that's right. For the boxers, obviously, promoters would be concerned about those costs, but that's a different issue.
Yeah.
You could put this, just put indefinite in front of each one of these. Indefinite, 30-day minimum. And then put at the bottom, all suspensions need medical clearance or something.
Or put medical clearance, to put what type of medical clearance.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'm specific, because especially say if someone has an orbital hematoma and the eye is shut, I have to have ophthalmology clearance.
Yeah. I see.
That's reasonable. Go for that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This might be a silly question, but when you suture them, are they bioabsorbable or does somebody remove the sutures?
Usually we use non-absorbable.
So who takes them out? Isn't that
They-
some sort of follow-up?
If they're going
SEP,
to the window.
someone else's problem.
You usually tell them wherever they're from, to go see their physician or something like that.
So then lacerations do get some sort of
Well,
follow-up.
let me tell you from the practical standpoint.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of them take them out themselves. So
Usually, I always tell them how many
I
days.
know
like
some
this
who
one should
take
stay
it
in
out
7 to
themselves.
10
You've
days,
instructed them in how to.
5 to 7 days. It depends on what.
They get the
where they are.
scissors and clip, clip, clip.
Right, 'cause I wasn't sure if they're getting a medical follow-up.
yeah, so there's no guarantee what type of follow-up they're getting.
Okay.
It may not necessarily be medical.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but that idea I like, the indefinite minimum, and then put it in minimum, and then it could be indefinite with no minimum. They just need to see someone right away that can clean.